What I want when I look at art, I want the world to feel like it's expanding a little bit. And I want it to make me ask questions, not necessarily questions that can be answered immediately, but when I'm looking at things, I want something that's going to linger. I don't know if I would say beauty, but visually it has to be captivating. All of my work is personal. It's about memory and it's about archiving, and I have Italian ancestry, but I have, just like many Americans, I'm just a mutt. I'm French, Italian, English, Irish, German, but I don't feel very connected to any of those ancestries. So I started a project based around that framework of, the desire to get to know these parts of myself and where I came from, if I'm influenced in any way at all from these places or these lineages. So the very first image that came from that project of sunburn in Naples, that's when everything kind of came together in my mind, because I have very English-Irish skin. My grandmother's English, and I inherited that skin tone. But here I was in Italy, baking in the sun and not handling it well. So it kind of symbolized that feeling perfectly of, here I am in this, this country that I'm supposed to have a connection to, but I literally can't even take the environment. After that, I did a residency in France, which is another ancestral country, in Marnay-sur-Seine, it's about an hour and a half from Paris. The studios are in an old 15th century monastery. It's a medieval village. I collected objects from the landscape that I found there and in flea markets, and created little scenes basically that reflected feelings of rootlessness for me, and all of the images tend to be made of different parts, which tied in with that concept of being made of different parts. One of them, for instance, is called French Postcard, and it has a little yellow snail in it. It's all things that I found right there, either in my studio or outside. So it has a leaf from the landscape outside in it. It has a clipping from a French art history book of a French sculpture that I've torn out. It's photographic because a lot of my images capture movement. The photograph is really important. Another image from that series called Mille Fleurs, which was inspired by the floral pattern in the unicorn tapestries, the medieval, that make up the background. It's the motif it makes up. Then I made that image, Mille Fleurs, exactly where the tapestries were made, that part of the world, Flanders. It feels very sculptural. It's a mirror placed out in a field of flowers, and I placed flowers on top. So time passing, the flowers are getting scorched by the sun, and the photograph, it's important because it's capturing a moment in time. The Film Electric series, also very important, the photograph, because they're temporary sculptures. That project came about by accident, basically. I was getting ready to move, and I have about 10 years of film archives, all the bracketed exposures, too light, too dark, experiments that are just quirky, never would work. Anyway, I'm clipping these strips of film up on the plastic sleeves that they come in, and I go to drop them, use the sleeve to sort of drop them in a waste bin, and I noticed that certain fragments were clinging to the plastic and would not fall, and then some would fall. And it was just this random collection of 10 years of my life in fragment form, sticking to the plastic and arranged in a very curious way. So I just loved that sort of metaphor for memory, and certain memories are stickier than others, and we don't really know why. And also that very fragmented nature of memory, the way that we can remember an entire day based on sort of reflection in somebody's eye. So I went into my studio and started chopping up more and more film and cutting strips of clear acetate into strips and circles and all sorts of different shapes. And then I attach a bunch of film onto these sheets, create an electrical charge, and then I hold it up, and that's when, this beautiful kind of kaleidoscopic magic happens, and they shift around and some fall away, and it's really beautiful, the movement that happens. I feel like I'm like initiating a performance or something. Then I start to, I bend the acetate and create sculptural forms, and with every bend, the pieces of film move around, and then I photograph it. I tinker a lot, and I like to see relationships, how objects play with each other. I love using light, like in the Film Electric project. Light is almost like another medium for me. I use light as an obscuring effect a lot. Light, when it bounces off of film, it completely erases the content. It's completely white. It completely obliterates images. So it's another way to kind of erase memory. Art history is, I do make a lot of images that look at that lineage within the Counterforms project, the European art history lineage. Like there's one called Modern Day Halo, where I was looking at kind of the evolution of the halo in Renaissance painting, and sometimes it's just a bright yellow orb, sometimes it's a circle of stars, sometimes it's a ring, a gold ring. So I became really interested in what that abstract shape means, and then what it means now. And I thought of it almost like I found it in an archaeological dig, and it's like, what is this thing? And then there's another image that's actually called Colors of Napoleon. It's a famous painting of Napoleon. I was reading a lot and thinking a lot about the tools that were available hundreds of years ago to artists, and it was paint, it was pigments that came from the earth, that were mineral-based. So I recreated that color palette with modern pigments, which are pretty much all synthetic at this point. I think about that a lot, like how many more tools I have available to me now as an artist than they did, and what is my connection? I'm doing some more Film Electric pieces. There's another project that came out of that called Mountains Without Faces, which is also film fragments, but I'm not using static electricity. Instead, I'm piling the fragments into clusters and then shaping those clusters in a very intuitive way. And it's more about reductive color theory and building color to the point of blackness. And then again, through the layering of memory in a film obscures it, just erases it, but with blackness. My mom was crazy about color theory in a very formal way. Color relationships, the color wheel, and I think that my use of color is rebellious. It's fairly willy-nilly. I'm just very attracted to certain colors. I love color. It's very vibrant. Usually I experiment with it. I use paint a lot, and I don't follow rules with color. I'm a rebel. I'm a color rebel. I like the idea of the image reflecting reality. So when I'm using light to obscure, and when I'm using a lot of fragments, which I typically do to compose my pieces, there's a whole lot missing. There's a lot of absence, and that's how I feel about life, frankly. There's a whole lot missing. In terms of how we think about things, we don't understand very much. It's important to me for that to be reflected in my images.